it is hard to overstate the scale of the human loss in Gaza, where Israel has killed thousands of Palestinians in retaliation for the October Hamas attack, which killed more than 1,400 Israelis. The Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, puts the death toll at more than 11,000 people, and the UN has called Gaza a, quote, graveyard for children. Many journalists have also been caught in the crosshairs. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 39 media members have been killed, marking the deadliest month for journalists since the group started collecting data in 1992. Israeli officials have said they can't guarantee the safety of any journalists in the Gaza Strip unless they embed with its own military. But that comes with a serious trade-off.
Journalists embedded with the IDF in Gaza operate under the observation of Israeli commanders in the field and are not permitted to move unaccompanied within the Strip. As a condition to enter Gaza under IDF escort, outlets have to submit all materials and footage to the Israeli military for prior review prior to publication. I tell you this because CNN has agreed to these terms in order to provide you, the viewers, a limited window into Israel's operations in Gaza.
I'm joined now by former CNN White House correspondent Dan Lothian. He's now the executive producer of GBH and PRX's The World radio show. And Susie Banikarim, host of the new podcast In Retrospect with Susie Banikarim and Jessica Bennett. Thank you both for being here. So, Susie, it's not just CNN. ABC has agreed to these terms as well, NBC, possibly some other media outlets that I'm not aware of. Do you believe that agreeing to embed with the IDF and share your raw footage is an appropriate trade-off to make in return for the ability to cover the biggest story in the world right now?
Yeah, I mean, these are really complicated decisions. And I think if it is a part of your coverage, if one of the things or one of the ways in which you're covering this conflict is to embed and you disclose it in this way, that it is a tool that you should have in the arsenal. I think the danger here is the danger that was often cited during the Iraq war embeds, which is often if you are embedded with the military, you are going to start to just naturally, by being with them, take on a sort of military point of view. I think at the time, Gay Talese said something like, you know, the danger here is that they become mascots for the military. And it's a little more complicated even, I think, in the Israel-Palestine conflict because we are really struggling to get any information out of Gaza that is not filtered through the Israeli government, right? I mean, of those 39 journalists that have been killed, 34 of them have been Palestinian. I think that's an important thing to note. So independent journalists in Gaza are far and few between. They are literally struggling to survive as they cover the conflict. And, you know, I think in this case, the fact that the only way Israel is letting any foreign journalists in to see for themselves this conflict does represent, as the military often calls this, a sort of information dominance that does skew the picture in ways that aren't great, to be honest.
I hadn't heard that phrase, but that seems very apt. Dan Lothian, if one of your correspondents got an offer, you know, come in bed with us, just make sure you share any audio, video that you get before you go to broadcast, what would you do? How would you respond?
Well, first of all, now on this side of the aisle, the first conversation I would have would be about safety. Right? You're always concerned if you're going into a situation like that. Is it safe? What are your chances of getting out, even if you're going along with the military? You know, this is the kind of assignment that, absent of any other access, you have to say yes to it, right? The key, though, is making sure that you are transparent with the audience. One of the big criticisms always is, you know, we didn't know that these were the guidelines and these were the rules when you showed us this report. So I think what you've seen from CNN in the lead-in to these pieces is where they lay it out and they'll say, this is what we have to show them, this is what we have to do, and this is what we don't do. And so we have full editorial control over the final product. The other thing I would say, there is a distinction between what we're seeing here, which is really forays in and out kinds of situation. Yes, you're embedded, but, you know, I don't foresee that this is going to be extended the way that we saw during past embeds with U.S. troops, where you were in for the long haul. You were going along, you were sleeping there, you were eating with them, you were in a tank with them. And so that is the danger of you're so close to the sources, You're reporting on them on a daily basis. You're also, I remember one reporter telling me that I was always a little nervous about how hard I was going to hit them, knowing that they were watching my back. And so we're humans at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing to have to weigh.
Exactly. They're there and allowing you to go along for a reason. It isn't safe, and they're going to provide somewhat of a circle of security around you. So that's in the back of your mind when you're out there as you're making these editorial decisions.
Yeah, it would have to be. I want to roll a bite from Ian Pennell, who's reporting for ABC News, which I think, forgive me, not a bite, but a quote from Ian Pennell. I want to just show the way he describes some of what he saw as he was embedded. And I think we can pull that up right now. Ian Pennell wrote, "It is a scene of utter devastation. Building after building is scarred and blackened by the bombardment. Nowhere is safe," the deputy commander tells me. A veteran of past wars, he says, "This time has to be different, that Hamas cannot be allowed to attack Israel again." I asked him about the huge civilian death toll, and he insisted the IDF is doing all it can to minimize casualties. The devastation all around suggests a less cautious approach. And I wanted to roll that because, Dan and Susie, it seems to me that that shows that there is at least the capacity to maintain a semblance of independence and critical detachment, even if you're operating under these conditions. Is that a fair conclusion to draw from that and, the work of other journalists? Susie, why don't you go first? And then.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And obviously, these are all seasoned journalists. You're not sending anyone into an embed that hasn't dealt with these issues before. These are, assignments we give to the most seasoned reporters, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, sure, there will be some ability to maintain this independence. But I think the question is kind of a larger question of, are you being used as a propaganda tool, right?
Yep.
Like, you're only seeing what they're allowing you to see. You're only showing what they're allowing you to show. So again, I think this is an important tool. You do have to send reporters on these embeds, but I think you have to also be really careful about how much you're really able to be objective in a scenario where just what you're seeing is being limited, right? There isn't a real and full picture being presented to you. You're only getting access to information they're willing to give you access to. And what concerns me in a situation like this with Ian is, if this is the information he's being access to, he's being given access to, what's the information he's not being given access to? Do you know what I mean?
I do. Dan, am I maybe getting ahead of myself in terms of that Pennell quote saying that shows it can work out okay?
No, look, I think that you can argue about what you're not seeing because of the restrictions that you have, but you're seeing something that you weren't seeing before, right? So you are getting some access, and you're able to either to support some of the narratives that we've heard out there, or cast a different light on those narratives. One thing I'll say, for viewers who are just now paying attention to this issue, again, as we've talked about, this came up during, I remember when embeds first started. Like, that was a thing. There were different versions of it, but the way that it ended up being in, with David Bloom, for example, if we recall, when he went in the Bloommobile and spent all that time, I remember there were a lot of conversations around the independence of the information, right? And I don't think that anyone felt that this was the perfect way to cover a war or a conflict. But it is, it can be that tool, right? It gets you closer than you can get from the outside, and having to rely either on locals to give you information, or just on visuals that you're able to, and military video.
I want to switch gears a little bit. An outlet called The Honest Report, a pro-Israeli web entity, accused freelancers who are working with some big Western news outlets of possibly having foreknowledge of the attack on Israel. They tweeted out a photo of one of these freelancers, Hassan Aslaya, posing with a Hamas leader. You can see it right there. AP and CNN have severed ties with Aslaya. They've also stressed that they had no advance knowledge of the attack on Israel. The New York Times and Reuters have also said they have no advanced knowledge, or had no advanced knowledge of the attack on Israel. Susie, if one or more of the freelancers singled out by the Honest Report did know that the attack on Israel was going to happen, does it end up reflecting badly on their employers, or does it not?
So I think this is complicated. These are freelancers, so they are not their employees. These are not, you're not an employer when you reach out to a freelancer after something's happened.
I shouldn't have used the word employers. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's complicated. I mean, certainly there's an obligation, but I don't think, I think I can say with almost 100% certainty, no American media outlet was aware of these attacks before they happened. I think it's an incredibly irresponsible claim. It puts journalists all over the world at risk when you claim things like this. And it's, part of the reason I think it's dangerous to be embedded with the IDF. The IDF has supported this claim and has been repeating it, even though it knows that despite the fact that this outlet is called Honest Reporting, they haven't actually claimed any reporting in this scenario. They have just made this accusation without any evidence. And so, sure, if they have found that these freelancers were in fact aware of the attacks or complicit in them, that is a real ethical concern. I don't think that is likely the case. And, what's interesting about this photograph you show is that it does seem really incendiary, right? You're like, look at this photographer, he's with the Hamas leader. But that Hamas leader at that time was part of the government of Palestine. Now, the Palestinian people may not feel that he represents them because, Hamas has not allowed elections in many years.
Right.
But at the time of that photograph, the Hamas leader was a government official, and that photographer was working with him, much like these embeds, right? So these are complicated relationships. We do need access. And if you're a Palestinian reporter, you are regularly communicating with Hamas leaders. Whether or not, you are aware or complicit in their attacks is a different conversation. But I don't think the picture itself is necessary evidence that this was, an attack that
foreknowledge.
The photographer was part of, right? I mean, that's just a really big accusation.
Dan, as Susie mentioned, the Israeli government has amplified this claim. Benny Gantz tweeted something along the lines of, if there were any journalists who knew this was going to happen and they didn't sound an alarm bell, they're equivalent to terrorists and should be treated as such. People have argued that type of rhetoric ramps up the danger that journalists face.
It really does. I mean, and what we see, it's the information war that happens alongside with the real war, right, across social media where various sides, and it's not just in this conflict, but you see this across society in general, where you will, if you find even a kernel of something that is connected potentially to truth, you blow it up to use it to your advantage, right? And so that's what you're seeing in a situation like this. I do want to wind back just a little bit, though, to just kind of give a little bit more context. Look, news organizations cannot do their work without locals on the ground. Whether they're freelance photographers, whether they're fixers, whether they're producers, we use them all the time. By virtue of the fact that they are local and that they live in those areas and those communities, they have family members, they have friends, they have sources, right? Now, I don't know everything that happened in this particular case behind the scenes, but often what will happen is someone's connected to someone, they'll say, hey, something's going down tonight. Whether or not you know what exactly is going down, you position yourself to be able to capture whatever is going down. It's possible that that's something that could have happened here. But this is how we operate. And then what we have to do as responsible journalists and executives in news organizations is to vet the people and have constant communication with them about who do they know, what do they know, who are they around. When we bring on new fixers or producers on the ground, it's a lot of vetting through people who've worked with them.
That's a heavy responsibility.
And it is, exactly.
Yeah.
But you have to do it. It's important.
Dan Lothian, Susie Banikarim, thank you both for talking this tricky stuff through.
Thank you.